Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act, I see Mr. Dusty Johnson here, and the pleasure of working with him to get that enacted. There's an enforcement issue in that any effort by the FMC to enforce the existing law or any future law would require them to go to court first to get permission from the court to carry out the enforcement. That's backwards. No other independent agency has that requirement. They issue a enforcement, and then the entities that are affected by that enforcement have the opportunity, if they disagree, to go to court to get it overturned. So, Mr. Leach, don't you think it's a good idea to do it the same, that the FMC do it the same way as others, other independent agencies?
I haven't examined this in close detail to really.
Well, you will, because I'm introducing a bill to require just that. How about you, Mr. Dar, excuse me. Don't you think it's a good idea that the FMC have the same power as every other regulatory agency? That is to issue an enforcement, and then if you don't like it, go to court.
So my understanding is that the change that's proposed would actually be limited to their review of the competitive nature of agreements between carriers. And it's important that an agency have authority to carry out whatever they're tasked with. However, adjudication is a very complicated matter for an agency, and it is even more complicated to do correctly.
So you don't like the idea that the FMC have the same enforcement mechanisms as others?
I'm saying I don't know that it is the same, sir, and I leave the judgment to Congress as to how much power to vest in an agency.
Then you're neutral on it. Thank you. Let's see, Mr. Allen, do you have access? You said that you don't have access to ships. What if the queuing of ships that are waiting to get to port were to be done in such a way that those ships that would take your product and other agriculture and other export products would get to the dock ahead of those that would not? Do you think that's a good idea?
We reviewed that concept, Mr. Garamendi, and appreciate you identifying ways to provide service for exporters. We think that would be effective and should be considered with the broad suite of ideas for additional steps that may be considered going forward.
Very good. Then we'll look for your support once again, as you did with the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, as we deal with the queuing opportunity, which is a non-regulatory thing. It's just simply if your ships are going to take American cargo, you can go to the head of the line. If you don't, you can wait at the outer harbor. Let's see, Mr. Leach and Mr. Dar, do you believe that international trade should be reciprocal? That is, if you want to import, you also have to take exports. Mr. Leach?
Well, it's not certainly part of our scope of business. We're a service provider to handle all trade. We are a facilitator, and we're indifferent. Our job is to ensure that there is capacity and capability to export.
I just want to get down to the principle here. The principle that trade is reciprocal. If importers into the United States have access to the American market, then the American exporters ought to also have access, that is, to export. Mr. Dar, do you think that's a good principle?
In principle, our business is founded on that. How
Terrific.
the balance strikes
Then you would
in the end is
support
driven by the
legislation that would require such reciprocal nature. That as the ocean carriers, if you want to bring exports into the United States, then you ought to be willing to take exports out of the United States so that Mr. Allen and others would have access to the space on your ships.
I think the details on how to do that would matter.
Oh, yes,
but
always the details. Well, there's going to be a bill to give you the opportunity to look at those details. Final point has to do with the antitrust exemption that the ocean shipping carriers have. Do you believe in free trade, capitalistic system of competition? All of you? Yes, yes, yes. I suppose all of you would think that's a good idea. Well, it just turns out that the ocean carriers are exempt from the monopoly and the antitrust laws of the United States. And there ought to be a law that the ocean carriers are subject to antitrust laws like other parts of our economy. Don't you think that's a good idea, Mr. Barr, Mr. Leach?
Sir, if you mean with regard to pricing,
I mean with
I agree.
regard to
But if,
all monopolistic exercises.
I'm
I
not sure.
believe I'm out.
I'm not sure what that means, but the vessel sharing
That
agreement
means
says
that
it
that
exists
means
today.
that the 1980 exemption from the antitrust laws be repealed.
I don't think that's a good idea, no, sir.
I thought you might not.